So, I'm gonna explain what I did in the last couple days, or day, a couple days, kind of, been almost 2 days. Um, because it's not clear what I was doing, or at least I feel like it isn't. So, um, if you watch the videos, you saw me go from like looking through marbles at the light, getting an idea for like a mass related effect or force or something, where light affects the weight of something and it changes how it moves after that. But I then did some experiments, and in testing it, I didn't actually find any proof. So I then um, built it out of substances I have access to, but not completely. I I removed the effect of light on it and built this, which does have a manipulated weight effect because it always will land more often on this side, which is why it's related to the dice concept. Also, I think it's leaking, but it can't get out. Anyways, the the point is that just because some idea that you have isn't proven in a like scientific sort of objective law kind of thing doesn't mean it can't be crafted from the material that you already have access to. I don't have access to the technology, which I imagine isn't overly complicated, to build something a bit more advanced. So we're going to um, build like a physics system out of the concepts we've thought of for the last couple um, days, day, and um, then we're going to make a program on the computer to sort of emulate how this idea behaves. Then I'm not sure what we're going to do, but for now we're going to do that. So, yeah. Um, in summary, what I'm saying is just because something has failed to be shown true or false doesn't mean you can't manipulate it with what has been shown to be a possible thing. Because the only difference between this and the actual function of our theory or our idea is that it varies by light. It doesn't have access to a way to change its mass, which is the liquid inside, based off of what the light around it is. And the only way I could do that is with a solar panel and some way to absorb and extract light from the air. I don't have that. So we have to go virtual. But yeah. We're going to start by just motion and not the effect of red mind, which is our secondary assumption. The first assumption is that mass changes with light, depending on how close it is and um, how its effect changes with the light and the shadow, because we'll consider shadow to be the negative of the two. So, like, when it's closer to the light and there's light in it, it fills with deep blue, and thus its mass increases by the amount and time it's in the light. And the deep green is like the substance. The yellow static is the light. The deep green is its holder. Deep blue is the mass. And red mind is the interaction of that whole effect. But it will also be relevant later when we do something along the lines of switching the shapes of things like we discussed very early on in this adventure thing that I'm doing. So we're basically just going to make objects that change weight in the light and when they're outside of the light, and we're going to do it in both a human level gravity scale, so falling directly down, and in space, because we can. So yeah, and then after we're done that, we'll probably work on this part. But that'll require what we recently invented, which is the substance creator, so that we can create a sort of substance change. But we're starting with just the basic stuff. Just to show that this thing actually does vary in mass depending on how it's positioned, notice how it's standing perfectly fine. Like this, if I turn it upside down, it'll fall every time. Or it'll lean if I balance it properly. But it has a very difficult time staying up completely straight. Like if it stands, it's standing on a tilt. And any touch will do that. But this side is perfectly fine. This side, it leans at the very least, or falls, depending on how its support is. Because it does have a little bit of water in the bottom, but it's a lot heavier on the top. It's sort of like a kind of like a magnet, but with gravity. It's interesting. But yeah. Hey, this is just the functional prototype. They slow down when they go in the light. It's backwards, but I'll fix it. Here's it again. Yeah. And again, because it's interesting. Yeah. But because the because the support part is what causes the rotation to begin with and how it rotates. I have to program that before I can make them in space kind of style gravity, and that means I might as well do this, or the substance change related part, while doing it, because they're both kind of interrelated. And so yeah, that's what I'm doing next. Before we do that, however, we have to make a more advanced physics system, because it's not very advanced at all. It's mostly just phases, and there's no substance, like there's no elemental difference. There's just the 4 relevant parts. Roll drop tool will be helpful for generating different substances that can be used in tandem with the weight and light effect. These are our elements, based off which are now affected by the forces and the weight situation of our world. So we have balloon wind, which is best described as clouds, rockfall, which is rocks in motion. They're heavier than balloon wind, which is lighter and does the opposite of rockfall. Reflection wind is probably water, so it has a reflective property. Spectral doesn't move in the same way, I guess. It's basically the stuff right here that you can't see, or that you can see. Never mind. It's the stuff that the hallucination stuff that I showed you before. And horizontal wave for some of the Hunger Games. That stuff. The color changing, light, reflective material that's also found on this in excess. That stuff. Alright. So, these three, like balloon wind, rockfall, and reflection, are right here. Balloon goes up always. Rock goes down. So does reflection. But reflection also reflects. Light comes. Horizontal wave also reflects, and it changes the color of this, of something. And then spectral moves it around in a specific way. So, spectral will cause it to move to places where it can transmute to one of these three based off its color. And we'll have to add places on the game where, in the game or program or whatever it is, where these can be converted from. So I don't know if I do a box with a screen. It could be up here, down here, and down here, or something. Which means that most of the substances will go through some sort of process in these areas, causing them to behave a certain way. Because when these get struck with a color, they change color, but this light also transmits information which is separate from their color. It's kind of confusing. It might look or make more sense if I do it. But, yeah. Rather than doing rotation at all, because it's complicated and I'd have to change a bunch of stuff and learn stuff. We're going to do two-directional motion, so like this and like this. And we're going to do, instead of rays, like a ray, that thing that's moving, we're going to do photons. So they're just going to be single particles traveling with different colors, and they're going to collide with our shapes of different kinds and colors. Yeah. All right. A bit longer than expected, but it's still gonna happen. Okay. The program or code or what I was going to do is going to take too long because it's just complicated, and I feel like I'm going to mess up, and that'll just make it longer. So we're going to use a primitive instead. We're going to emulate the behavior of the weight change with water and nature instead. We could use candles because they have the same malleable phase property. Look at that. The only difference is that you can't see the smoke from the wax. But, I don't know, you might be able to see some of the smoke from this, but I don't know how necessary that is when we've got at least two phases of matter here, and the third permeates the entire else of everything else. Interestingly, water actually does behave with light. So, the light changes it from water to gas, from solid to liquid. The lack of light creates gas to solid, liquid to solid, but I think most people learn that in school, or at least I did. So it turns out that it is possible for matter to alter its properties by light. It's unclear whether it is just a side effect. I'll have to Google whether air is lighter than water. So, yeah, yes, they are. That means that light does in fact change the mass of something. Huh. Well. Vial. Or it's actually like the bottom part of a spray bottle, but has pencils in it. Its mass is mostly concentrated here. So while its support would allow it to stand like this, it is very unlikely, unless dropped like this, and even then, it will fall on its side. It can't balance on this part, so its only place to position itself when thrown is that way. That is because, depending on both its relative other substances and its positions of gravity, it is either efficient in its environment or altered in its environment. And the various substances and their positions actually, and how they are bonded to each other, actually affects how they will fall, as well as their support, as you saw with the pen just there, because it touches my finger as it falls. It didn't draw on me. This works. The light does change the substances. It just doesn't work as expected, because rather than directly affecting the form only, well, actually no, it does always affect the form. The heat of the light affects directly what it'll become, and it doesn't quite matter whether it's the heat or the light. It's one or the other. and they both, well, one creates heat, the other one creates light, like firing. The sun is a fire. The heat and the light is what heats everything, at least from my understanding. Light creates heat. So, and that heat in turn affects the majority of the substances, including things like whether it'll bond, whether it'll change state, and whether it will, whether you can touch it, is another example. And a variety of other things that I can't think of. Or like maybe an interaction, those basic things. It even affects conductivity. So like lightning. And light essentially does all those things based off of how much light for how long and what frequency, both in like waveform and emission. So while I was going to construct the process at a virtual level and then suggest building it artificially because I didn't think it was possible or provable, I'd say that water and light kind of do it by their own natural behavior. So it's obvious that anything uses this process, but I'm simply struggling to find some use I don't already know exists, but this has happened before, so I'm gonna keep trying. I did think of different ways to manipulate wax mass and with polymer clay and fiber, which would take up similar amount of space but way less, which would take up similar amount of space but way more, and which would be like the default of it. But I haven't found any means of utility for myself yet. Hopefully by the end of this video I have found some use. I was going to use the code to find one in a short way by emulating it, but because I'm not doing that, I have to use this. So I was thinking of maybe going back to the code, but using the concepts of this rather than the way I was going to do it, because it actually seems simpler to go with this idea than to add that and this without any plan of action, which is why I stopped, because I didn't really know what I was doing. So basing my model off something real actually helped it. So yeah. Alright. I don't know if you can see that. But it heats up when it's in contact with the light for a period of time. Thus it evaporates into a gas. That's just the prototype. Now I can mess with it to find some way of using it. But that's it for now. This thing, when they're solid, they don't fall anymore if they're balanced on something, but it's not as realistic as real life. They're heated up, they turn into gas for a period of time, but then they cool off again, which is why you saw it move. If I run it again, you'll see more clearly what I mean. It'll move back and forth, and eventually it'll hit that one, moving it closer. And closer. Move back that time. It's supposed to be in the water state, but it's unable to move. And I think that one is too. But it's pinned under here, so it's not perfect. But I will eventually make the lights move or change from this constant stream to make it behave more more variation than what it's doing right now. It's not perfect, but I'll have to do for now. However, it is now 11 in the evening, so I'm going to go to bed. This should be posted in the morning, and I will continue working on this after that.